Yuval Noah Harari, the mind behind the mega bestseller Sapiens, is back with a new book called Nexus. And wow, does it cackle a massive paradox. The thing is, we have more information right at our fingertips than any civilization in history. So why does it feel like we're teetering on the brink of collapse? Let's dive into his argument.
So Harari kicks things off with this really fundamental question. We call ourselves Homo sapiens, the wise human. We've built up this incredible, almost godlike power. But he argues that power is not the same thing as wisdom. And right now, it kind of feels like all that power is just pushing us towards self-destruction.
He points to these huge existential threats we're all facing: ecological collapse, AI running wild, the real possibility of global war. Now, you'd think these massive problems would bring us all together, right? But instead, it seems like we're drifting further and further apart. Harari says the real problem, the root of it all, comes down to two completely opposite ways of thinking about information itself. All right, so let's start with the first view, the really optimistic one that pretty much built the world we live in today. This is the dream that fueled the internet revolution, the promise of Silicon Valley, the whole shebang.
Now, Harari gives this a name. He calls it the naive view. At its heart is this very simple, very appealing belief. If you just get more information, you'll find the truth. And once you have the truth, that gives you both wisdom and power. This is the whole philosophy that built Silicon Valley, this idea that if we can just collect enough data, we can solve pretty much any problem.
And this diagram right here, it really lays it all out. You can see the flow. Information creates truth, and that truth then splits off and creates both power and wisdom. It's all very neat, very logical. The core idea here is that if you have a free marketplace of ideas, the truth will just naturally rise to the top.
And look, this wasn't just some fantasy from tech entrepreneurs. It was a seriously powerful political idea. Back in 1989, Ronald Reagan famously said that the microchip would be the David that brings down the Goliath of totalitarianism. The thinking was that information is like oxygen, and the more of it you have, the freer and stronger your society becomes. And to be fair, this way of thinking has had some incredible successes. Harari tells this amazing story about the famous writer Goethe. Back in the 18th century, Goethe's family had 12 children, but only 3 of them actually survived into adulthood. Today, because we've collected and analyzed just unbelievable amounts of medical data, the global child survival rate is over 95%. That's a direct line from information to truth to life-saving power. But here's the pivot. If that naive view was the whole story, we should be living in a paradise right now. Instead, we're drowning in more information than ever before, and we're staring down the barrel of ecological collapse and the threat of nuclear war. So clearly, something is very wrong with this picture. And that brings us to the other side of the coin, a much, much darker worldview that has risen up to challenge that optimistic dream. It's a deeply cynical philosophy, and it's gained a scary amount of traction lately. Harari's name for this is the populist view. And in this worldview, there's no such thing as objective truth. There's only power. Any claim to truth coming from an institution, whether it's the media or even science, is just automatically dismissed as a lie, a trick from a corrupt elite that's just trying to control the people. Okay, so what's fascinating here is how this diagram compares to the first one. Look at it. Information leads directly to power. Truth? It's gone. It's been completely erased from the equation. In this way of thinking, language itself just falls apart. Facts aren't facts anymore. It's just a question of, well, whose facts are they? So let's put them side by side. The naive view wants to find truth and trusts experts and institutions. The populist view just wants to win power and only trusts your own research. Or, let's be honest, more often than not, it trusts a single charismatic leader who claims to be the only one telling it like it is. This, right here, is the central battle of our information age. Now, this is where Harari makes a really provocative connection. He argues that this super cynical, information is just a weapon idea didn't actually start with today's populists. He traces its intellectual roots all the way back to radical left-wing thinkers like Karl Marx, who also saw all of history as a simple power struggle, where any claim to truth was just a cover for oppression. So are these our only two choices? A kind of blind optimism that hasn't delivered on its promises, or a toxic cynicism that says truth doesn't even exist? Well, Harari says no, there has to be another way. This is the question, right? Is information a path to truth, or is it just a weapon for power? This is the dilemma at the very heart of Nexus. We are stuck between these two extremes, and we have to figure out how to find our way through this incredibly dangerous middle ground.
So what's the solution? Well, Harari argues we need a much more grown-up, sophisticated view of the world. We have to accept that yes, information can be used as a weapon, but we also can't just throw our hands up and give up on the idea of truth entirely. We have to figure out how to use our power wisely, even when it's messy and difficult.
And just when you think this couldn't get any more complicated, a brand new player walks onto the field. And it changes absolutely everything. I'm talking, of course, about artificial intelligence. This might be the single most important point Harari makes about our future. For all of human history, we've created tools. A hammer is a tool. It does exactly what you tell it to do. But AI is not a tool. It's an agent. It's the first technology in history that can make its own decisions and even create new ideas all by itself.
The experts, they're not really worried about Hollywood robots taking over. They're warning about two much more realistic dangers. The first is that AI could just supercharge all our existing conflicts, creating a new kind of silicon curtain and an AI arms race that spirals into a catastrophic war. The second is that a non-human intelligence could create a global totalitarian network so complex and powerful that we completely lose control.
And listen, this isn't just speculation. This is a direct quote from a 2024 paper written by people like Yoshua Bengio and Jeffrey Hinton. These guys are literally the godfathers of modern AI. They and so many other experts are screaming from the rooftops that the stakes here could not possibly be any higher. Which brings us full circle, right back to that very first question. We, the wise humans, have just unleashed a completely new kind of power into a world that's already being torn apart by these warring ideas about truth and power. So Harari's ultimate challenge to all of us is this. Can we finally find the wisdom to match our own power before it's too late?